Hey everybody, welcome to Missing Links with John, Brock, and myself, Stephen King, where we discuss what's missing in Web3 architecture. This week, we talk about
what is a layer 2 and why the heck do we need it with Web3 right now.
For feedback, please go to missinglinks.fm, send us an email, give us some feedback on what we discuss and what you'd like us to cover next week. All right, let's get into it.
How you guys doing?
Good.
Doing good.
How are you?
I'm super pumped to talk about this week's topic, which is layer 2. And I've been doing a lot of research on layer 2. I spent some time just last year looking into it, but you guys are more than familiar with all the different things that are going on with it. And so I thought we would start with what is a layer 2 and why the heck do we need it with Web3 right now?
So right now, there's a big issue within Ethereum, and that issue right now is scalability. I think everyone knows that. And when it comes to scalability, the biggest issue is transactions per second. And there's this big talk about, once the consensus mechanism changes, how will you actually scale to actually make it attractive for adoption? So in the early days, there was different ways of going about it, but those ways were called layer 2. So layer 1 being, the main chain, mainnet, and being the protocol itself, and layer 2 being think of it as an upgraded derivative of layer 1, where you could think of it as you can control the transaction rate with your own consensus mechanism, your own way of bunching transaction, and then submit it via, a multi-sig contract or in a bulk, thus reducing your costs. If you think of layer 2s, so if you think of the congestion that you see on the network when you have these big token drops and all these other things, you can actually use a layer 2 solution to provide the security within transacting, and then bulk the transactions on the settlement of layer 1, thus, cutting your costs. So there's different ways of doing it. You have channels, plasma, side chains, rollups, and those are kind of the main ones. And before we drill into those, I would kind of see, Brock, if you had any other comments you would like to say.
No, I think you covered it. L1, layer 1, that's Ethereum. L2s are the idea is it's like a separate blockchain, and they, in some way or another, they manage their own state, their own transactions, and those get secured by submitting a transaction back onto the main chain.
Yeah.
So let me ask this. So Ethereum is packed with transactions. The transaction fees go through the roof. Transactions are getting lost in translation, canceling out. So we have, this method called layer 2. Layer 2, we can basically replicate, the Ethereum blockchain, and we can either take the consensus or not take the consensus mechanism. And then we can have these transactions take place on a side chain, kind of put all those transactions together and then bundle them up. And so instead of 10 transactions in a row on Ethereum, there's 10 on the side chain, and then we package them up into one transaction, put the metadata onto Ethereum, and then that, in theory, is supposed to reduce our costs. Is that kind of what you're saying?
More or less, yeah. And I think the important distinction there is the state of an L2 is not mirrored from L1. So they're two distinct chains, but you can take the transaction hashes from L2 and rehash them as a single transaction on L1. So you get the finality and security of L1, but the state still lives in L2.
And so to that point, there's actually a really cool website that I just want to mention real quick for those who are listening, called L2beat.com. And it'll show some of the most popular L2s, that being Atrium and Optimism, which are both Optimism rollup technologies. But it actually gives a breakdown of the funds that are stored within it, and the L2 token, or the asset that's being held within the account. So if it's over 50%, they're like, okay, one account holder is the validator for most of the L2. So that's kind of a very cool technology. So I just wanted to point that out before we kind of drill into the individual, for those listening, before we drill into the individual L2 solutions and, pros, cons, and our final thoughts on them.
Well, let me ask you guys this. So one thing that we looked into was payment channels. I know SpankChain was actually built a bunch of stuff around payment channels. And from what I gather, you're taking the consensus mechanism in most of the attributes of the original chain, and just kind of having these side channels, these side transactions, and then so why have we expanded beyond that? Why is there things like rollups? I've looked into Optimism, Arbitron, and then also what's the benefit? I mean, we're going to have both of these methods, payment channels, and we're going to have rollups and everything else that you mentioned, or do you think that there's going to be a winner take all there?
I personally think the winner take all becomes Ethereum. And so
Yeah.
it's so it's all these solutions, they can be catered to specific use cases, specific companies. Like outside the Ethereum ecosystem, you have like the Bitcoin Lightning Network, for instance, and this is like a pure payment channel. Works fantastic. So you could see similar things happening in Ethereum, hypothetically, where it's not about Arbitrum versus Optimism. It's which one better suits your business needs. And so if people can easily hop between them, easily transfer value, then it doesn't have to be a winner take all.
So let me ask this too, John. So ETH 2.0 is coming up, right? So
Yes, I was actually just about to mention that. So, real quick, when we talk about layer 2, we're talking about channels as of now. Then we have Plasma, which is another thing we'll get to, and then side chains and rollups. So the one thing that question I do want to pose as we're discussing this, and it's very interesting to think about, is what is the role of L2s after ETH 2.0 comes out? Because if you think about ETH 2.0, if it plays out with the scalability and that transaction rate, what will the benefit actually become with these L2s? So,
well, John, start by defining ETH 2.0 and sharding.
Oh, what was that?
Just sharding. Just go over basically. Sharding is basically the. I mean, I know that it's packed with a bunch of more things, but as it's related to this conversation, sharding is sort of the method that's going to bring us to what, thousands of transactions per second, thus decreasing the density right now that's on Ethereum. So I'm just curious. I know that all three of these are going to work together, but what is sharding and how does that play into this?
So, just to kind of just recap, so with the upgrades that are happening with ETH2, you're going to have the beacon chain, which is pretty much the groundwork of the upgrade. That's where all the staking is, because it's going to a proof of stake. You're pretty much betting on transactions to go into the pool, and then it will coordinate the new system. When the merge happens, after the beacon chain, you're going to have different ways of rolling out. The first one will be primarily with the validators and how the nodes operate, and then it'll start moving over to how those shards and those side chains communicate across the network when it comes to the pretty much the bytecode, the metadata, if you want to call it that. Because right now, once that happens, transactions will move faster, but the data store won't be upgraded just yet. So that is still there is still a process there. So ETH1 will still remain as the transaction and execution layer with the EVM, but ETH2 will just change how that consensus mechanism works across different chains. So think of it as kind of an expansion of what L2 is trying to do right now and is succeeding in.
Got it. So Brock, walk me through the sharding component. And then also, why is it easier to, through payment channels, to migrate the smart contracts over to the Ethereum chain, whereas when you're doing side chains, it makes it a lot more complex. Is it because it's different consensus mechanisms?
So For sharding itself, that's really talking about like splitting up the data so that it's even further decentralized, if you will. So it's similar to like partitioning the database. And I think it's like circling back to your earlier question about like what's the point of L2s in this world. Vitalik has a famous tweet where it's not about sharding versus rollups; they're like multiplicative. So you can have like from a scale factor, we're at hundreds of thousands of users on Ethereum. If we want to get to billions, we need a far greater scale. So I think L2s play the same role in that sense. But your question around like payment channels versus like side chains, I think my impression at least is a big difference there is around payment channels. The finality state is just about who holds what value. So it's a fairly simple data model. I think with side chains, you're dealing with potentially complex contract state. And so that may or may not be easily rolled up or like re-centralized, if you will, back onto the L1 or base layer.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. It sounds like all three of these methods are going to work together. I mean, one question I have is why would anybody, so we've built a couple apps, but why would anybody build a consumer facing app today on Ethereum or any other blockchain for that matter? Because it seems like this is key infrastructure. I know it's key infrastructure because we had to build out different methodologies ourselves we basically built out our own payment channel because we ran into the issue of gas fees and everything else. So does it just not make sense to build a consumer facing application until all of this infrastructure gets worked out?
I think it still makes sense to build, and the reason I say that is because yes, a big change is coming, but those change, I don't want to say should be backwards compatible, but the only thing changing is really how we increase the rate of transactions and settle them securely. So if you build an application, for the most part, and this, purely speculation, migrating should not be that hard theoretically when it comes to the business logic and the building of the application. Maybe there's going to be some nuances in how fees are calculated, but I don't think there's a point in waiting.
Well, I mean, so you have to make the decision on whether to build on a layer one or layer two. So Brock, if if you're going to build a consumer facing app today, would you just go straight to Optimism or one of these other layer twos?
I think if I was running a business looking towards the long term, I would start on Ethereum. I think like Optimism, Arbitrum, these other L2s, they have a lot of potential, but it's still early days. Like I think Optimism, their state layer is still in like development, for instance, and they're open about that. So I think those become the future, but it's still it's very, very early days. So if you're doing anything mission critical for a business, it still makes sense to be on Ethereum because that is going to be there no matter what. And then to John's point, you can always migrate later.
Got it. So, but in the longer run, how do you envision the layer, or which layer do you think applications will be built on once all of the bugs and everything else gets worked out? Layer two?
I think it depends on the use case, but generally probably L2s. So like you look at something like Uniswap, that would probably stay on the main chain. Like it's like a financial dealing with direct monetary funds. But if you're working on something like Imbrex, like we were, where you're dealing with real estate data and it's more just like application specific, there's not really a need for that state to live on L1. So moving that off onto an L2 or a side chain makes a lot of sense.
John, you mentioned Plasma a few times. Are you familiar? I know Joseph Poon and Vitalik. You mentioned Plasma a few times, I'm just keen to learn. Do you know anything about that project? I mean, I read about, I know Joseph Poon and Vitalik were working on it, and then it turned into, I think, OMG, right? And do you, can you just explain what Plasma is, or is that not within your wheelhouse? I haven't heard that in a while. That's why I ask, and I'm curious.
So plasma. So with plasma, a very, very minimal experience, but with the Merkle trees, I know that it's allowed for more complex DeFi activity when it comes to like withdrawals and maybe working on the waiting time. But um, I think the only downfall, so I haven't worked with it directly, but I think what's cool about Merkle trees is that it's on the main chain. I do remember the tests that just destroyed the gas fees when we were messing around with some of those technologies. But um, the one thing I will say about it is it's cool. It's a cool concept, but I think one of the pitfalls of it, along with channels, is that you still have to actively be checking like the funds of the chain, either via the multi-sig contract or the uh, the operator. And I don't know. I'm not a big fan of Plasma personally. I think if anything, I would use channels and or side chains because you have a lot more control with some type of what do you want to call it, bridge, like writing your own bridge and then doing that. So uh, that's my own opinion, but I think I don't know if I heard it earlier, but I think what's going to win are side chains, at least for when it comes to changes within the protocol and different use cases, because it's easier to write a bridge than having to find something that's compatible. So
Why
yeah.
why is there I haven't played around with them enough. I mean, only Optimism. But even that, why do they have a token, and why is there TVL? Like, why are people locking up money in these protocols? Is that for a bridge to the main chain?
I think it's coming from the bridge. So the question, John, was like, why is there total value locked in these L2s? And I think it's just people moving. It's a reference point for the activity on the L2. So people moving, say, Ethereum onto Optimism is a positive sign that more people are using Optimism. And so I believe that's how they're defining total value locked.
Well, cool. So I guess my last question would be, let's say that we're gonna put up a. I mean, we're building apps right now, but we're not gonna go through a payment channel because it's a different kind of app. But if it sounds like you guys wouldn't do that anyway. You would just build on layer one, which makes sense. But let's say hypothetically we were going to build on layer two for X reason. What are the risks involved? I mean, there seems to be funds that are being stolen every day now, and that's just the nature of crypto, I guess. But that's always a threat. But are there any other risks that you guys see?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
I'm just curious about what the risks are if you're going to build on a layer two today. Other than funds being stolen, what else? What are the other considerations?
I think that question, no matter what happens, your funds can get stolen either way. If your account's compromised on a layer two, it's going to get compromised on the layer one. So I think at the end of the day, it comes down to how you connect to these services and trusting the uh, trusting that there's some standard of due diligence where the contracts themselves or whatever you're interacting with, there's some degree of transparency, especially when within layer twos if you're bundling stuff. So
Well, so let me so basically funds can be stolen if there's an invalid route submitted to the system, right? So how would that happen? How would an invalid state route be submitted? Is that on the development side that somebody just messes up a piece of code in the smart contract, deploys it, and the bridge isn't successful, or what's happening there?
Yeah, I was going to say one of the inherent risks with like an L2 is you have to trust the network, just like you're trusting Ethereum for everything else. You also have to trust the L2 as an ecosystem. And part of the issue I was kind of alluding to earlier right now is a lot of these L2s are in early stages. Um, and even more importantly, like take the Optimism example, the reason they're able to do an L2 and a roll up is because they control all of the consensus. They run the nodes that like give the transactions finality on the L2 chain. So if anything were to happen internally on Optimism, that presents a huge existential risk to the entire ecosystem.
Can an individual spin up a node on an L2 like they can on with Ethereum?
Think it depends on the L2, but at the moment it's far less common.
So it's a lot more centralized, in other words.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. It's funny because, but that's the only way to, I mean, that I've really read that you're able to keep Ethereum decentralized are these L2s, because the alternatives to scaling ETH really centralize the system, but the L2s are extraordinarily, not extraordinarily, but they're pretty centralized. And so, I guess this is the next phase of experiments.
To their credit, the L2s are working on ways to decentralize it. It's just the early stages are keeping it centralized so they can keep the development fast and figure out how to scale it from there. I would also love to see somebody come up with like roll-ups as a service. So like as a given company like Imbrex, we could run our own roll-up. It is centralized because it's our own thing, but we're like rolling up onto the Ethereum main chain, so it's still decentralized in that way.
So we wouldn't have to do the bridge and all that jazz, isn't it?
Or it's hypothetically baked into this like invented roll-ups as a service business. Yeah.
Like you check a box. Here's how much security I want. Here's the amount of transactions that we're going to have.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, let's make that happen.
Yeah.
It sounds so easy.
Yeah.
No, that's a great idea. I too hope somebody comes up with that, because look, I imagine that's why I said the comment earlier. I don't know how you build a consumer facing app. I know, Brock, you said you do it on Ethereum, but we've gone so deep into all this stuff over the last, however long it's been since 2016 we got started. So I think it's crazy to build anything that is not improving this kind of infrastructure. I don't know how this technology can scale. I don't know how you can have regular people using this in any kind of a global network until these key concepts are really flushed out. And it seems like that's going to take some time. So if you were going to participate in this economy, you could do it with NFTs and other experiments, but that's pretty much what they are. They're front end experiments so that we can test the back end.
In a lot of ways.
Or am I wrong? Do you guys disagree with that?
I don't disagree, at least beyond the L1s. Like I think there's a reason that Bitcoin and Ethereum are solidified as like number 1 and number 2 in volume.
And Brock, you agree with me that NFTs are lame? Yes.
I wouldn't go that far. I think NFTs as a technology is fantastic.
No, I agree. I'm just busting your chops. Just the whole GIF, the whole movement.
Well, so even like in this conversation, a lot of NFT projects, if they're like hugely successful, they find themselves moving to say Polygon. So it's still EVM compatible, but they can like get the transaction throughput they need to do like gaming or whatever else they might be doing.
Yeah, Polygon's an interesting project. I mean, they started as another company. I forget the name of them. I was tracking them then, and then they pivoted. They made a good pivot, but aren't they on the Binance chain, or they were on the Binance chain, and then maybe they're their own chain now, right?
I think they're their own thing.
Their own layer one, or yeah.
It's a great
anyway,
area.
We don't have to go into that. I just I'm skeptical of anything that's on Binance chain. I without knowing enough about it, I should probably be less skeptical, but just I don't know. I've heard some horror stories, so I tend to steer clear.
Yeah, that's fair.
Well, cool. So is there anything else that you guys want to touch on? Any projects that you're particularly keen on? Brock, I know we were talking both about optimism, and I haven't spent time with Arbitron, so I'm going to check that out. But Brock or John, have you been playing with anything that you like?
I personally, as of now, I'm a big fan of just Arbitrum because of Optimism, just because of the personally, just I've had less of issues working with the validator, but I think because Optimism is a roll up, and I feel like it has better, in my opinion, a better validator. I think that's kind of my go-to, even though it's only number 2 with a total volume of a little shy of 1 billion. But yeah.
Yeah, I've had a similar experience. Yeah, like something about optimism. Even though Arbitrum is further along, there's something about optimism that just feels more polished. Like they're like they're doing it right. Yeah, I encourage anyone to play with both. Well worth it.
Yeah. I feel optimism, core is going slow and steady and trying to really figure out the right way, whereas maybe derivatives of that are kind of going a little too fast, in my opinion. But
yeah, no, I'm going to play with Arbitron, but I like optimism a lot. I think they have a good team, and I think they're going to do very well. So, well, look, we'll leave it at that. If anybody wants to email us on the good, bad, and the ugly, it's hello at, let's see, what is the email? I think it's just hello at missinglinks.fm.
Yep.
And really, we the three of us talk pretty much every week. We're building different applications on Web3 and figured, you know what, let's just record it and put it out there because, we have some pretty interesting discussions and people listen. Cool. If we can be helpful. If not, then we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. So send us an email if you want to, participate in the discussion, or if you want to, provide some comments. And, next week, well, actually, we got a couple of cool things for next week, but won't go through them right now. So I appreciate it, John. You enjoy yourself in Chicago. I was just there yesterday. And Brock, I will see you in Moab.
Sounds good.
Adios, guys.